All right, so I guess you should all be seeing Heather and me. So a very warm welcome to you, Heather, over there in
Thank
Canada.
you. Thank you very
Very
much.
happy to have you here in the interview. So just a quick introduction. Heather Hargraves has been a yoga and meditation teacher for a while and then made her master's degree as a trauma therapist, also using bio and neurofeedback in her clinical work. And she was my neuromeditation mentor during my certification last year. So we had quite a few sessions, and I kept annoying her with all these weird questions.
Perfect. I loved all the questions. I like enthusiasm. It's great.
Yeah, well, that's maybe what I brought into it. Yeah, so
Yeah.
very warm welcome to you. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's really great to meet all you guys and to be here. And I look forward to this little journey we're going to take together.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea would be to have an interview for like 45 minutes, and then we'll open the space for any questions that came up. So everyone, if you have questions, you can save them for a few minutes, and then you'll have the chance to ask a few questions. Yeah, so Heather, maybe you can also go a bit deeper into the path that you actually went on. So I mentioned yoga and meditation teacher, and then you kind of went more into a more scientific approach. So maybe you can explain a little bit how that came about.
Yeah, no problem. So a lot of this has come about, I would qualify as like a wounded healer in many ways. When I was 21, I was in a car accident that more or less crushed my body. It took them an hour to cut me out of the car. I shattered my pelvis, broke my jaw. I spent about 7 years with chronic pain, had 7 surgeries. Doctors told me that I wouldn't do a lot of things again, that I would live in pain, that I would have a lot of issues. And I didn't agree with the doctors. I didn't believe that. I knew I'd have limitations, but I thought the body was capable of quite a bit more if I could figure out how to work with my nervous system. Um, so yoga was really my first introduction into that healing, and I would say pain was my first meditation teacher. So I had to learn to still my mind, and I had to learn to work with my states of consciousness in order to kind of like transcend and rebuild the relationship I had with my body after such deep injuries. And that led me down a path of becoming a yoga instructor. I became a body worker. I did Thai massage for quite some time, and I owned a studio. But I had a lot of people coming to my classes with before and after, a lot of emotional stuff therapists had sent them, and I just didn't feel ethically like I really knew how to work with these individuals. And I seemed to understand what they were going through my own injuries, and I just got really curious. So I actually went back to school to study the neuroscience of meditation. And I did I had actually done a philosophy degree and an English degree before, after my accident, to help with my existential crisis. And then after I graduated, there was a death in the family that led me down another route to kind of understand trauma in general because of the stress that gave me as well. So as I was pursuing neuroscience, I basically did a study where we looked at which meditation is good for who and why. So it was my first introduction to this idea that meditation is both a state and a trait, and that by the states come first. So the more you practice specific states, it can lead to these specific outcomes, which we see as traits. And the three core traits associated with mindfulness are openness, curiosity, and acceptance. Um, so then when I got into my master's program, I thought I was going to just do counseling, and I was leaving all this neuroscience behind. But my supervisor, I had gone to an ayahuasca ceremony, and he caught wind of that and found out that I was interested in altered states. So he handed me Robin Carter Harris's paper on entropy, and that was the first thing I read on psychedelics, probably in 2014, 2015. Um, and he said, I have an idea for psychedelic informed neurofeedback. And I said, okay, cool. So we hooked ourselves up and we tried it. And I remember I went home and I was washing the goo out of my hair, and I was in the shower and I was looking at the bubbles, and I was like, oh, these bubbles are just so beautiful. I was just so happy. I was playing in the bubbles. And then I just kind of stopped. I was like, I am in a different state right now. Like I actually feel little bit high. So I asked him who gets this research. He said, well, I can see we get a cross appointment. So my program approved. So I did my thesis in neuroscience and my master's in counseling, and I kind of made my own path and studied this deep states neurofeedback protocol. And at the end of that, I ended up meeting Jeff from the Neuromeditation Institute. And I went to one of his trainings. Like, I read a chapter in a book, an EEG book, before he had really started the Institute. And we realized just how much overlap we had in our understanding and the research I had done. And he dove a little deeper into the deep states world as well. And I've kind of just been walking with him hand in hand as he's built the Neuromeditation Institute. And I've continued to be heavily involved in the psychedelic community and advocating for the interface of neurofeedback and psychedelics, because I really think this technology has the ability to help us become more aware of our states as a mirror, and as we prepare for these experiences, to really reach those peak, which are really deep surrender experiences, requires a certain level of like awareness to allow yourself to go there. And to have a sense of the edges of self that may be preventing you from going there. And then afterwards, when you've got all this flexibility in your brain, it's really easy to go right back to those same patterns. And so if we use technology, we can really help people deepen the state change. And as entropy comes down, the neural networks can hold the changes a little more easily. And so it seems finally all of my presentations and going about this for the last 5 years has finally reached a place where it's actually coming true. And we've started a company called Divergence Neuro, which is built to work with all neurofeedback headsets that are currently on the market that are customer grade and affordable, to allow people to connect from a distance. We're going to allow the neuromeditations to be on there. And we partnered with a biomedical company to start developing a biomarker model for psychedelic states and helping clinicians assess if they're likely to have a deep experience, and then also assess with EEG during a psychedelic experience, are you hitting those critical points of entropy that lead to those long-term outcomes? So that's where I'm at right now. Still teaching for NMI. I work in private practice as a trauma therapist. I do a lot of complex PTSD work. Rebuilding psyches and people's sense of self is my everyday thing. Playing around with states.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. Maybe I'll just quickly say a few words regarding neurofeedback, because I think we're talking about it a little, and so just that everyone gets the perspective. So maybe not everyone knows what an EEG is or neurofeedback. And I would explain it in a way that I would say you put electrodes on someone's head, you can read out the brain waves, and as we know which areas in the brain are responsible for what, and also with the frequencies that we can read out, we can tell whether a certain area is over aroused or under aroused. And then we simply give feedback to the person hooked onto the EEG. So it's not that like you can go in and manipulate. It's more that you give them feedback and you just teach the brain which direction you want it to go. So if you want to increase activity in one area or decrease, you just give a reward if the brain is doing what you want. Is that how one could explain it?
Yeah, the high jump if you want it to go up, or the limbo bar if you want it to go down. And it's just a mirror. It's just easier to see yourself if you have the mirror and the reflection. It also is really great for highlighting embodied awareness and somatic awareness, which in our culture and many cultures these days tends to be a little bit numbed out, because we're so busy and always in our heads doing, that our like being self is not as nurtured as it could be. I mean, you guys are doing a lot of movement and stuff, so this is everything that you're about. But in our day-to-day, the way we use technology right now is very flat. So you could look at neurofeedback as a relational technology, a way of seeing yourself through technology instead of just siphoning your attention and giving it all away.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned that in your past and after the accident, you actually used meditation and yoga also to kind of treat yourself and to overcome the obstacles that doctors maybe told you that you would have to live with. So can you go a bit more into detail what you did there, what you experienced there?
Yeah, I'd say that I just didn't agree. The doctors were giving me a lot of drugs to take and they made me feel really sick. And I just felt that there must be a way for me to work with my stress response and my pain that wasn't also adding to the allostatic load or the stress in my system. And I very luckily found like a really small meditation network in the city, and it was TM. It was actually transcendental meditation, hilariously, which is basically what I've studied since, that I got introduced to. And so through that practice and learning now that it's, TM is one of those meditations that really quiets our mind. It quiets a network in the brain called the default mode network, which we hear a lot about these days if you're following any sort of psychedelic literature. Just kind of like our idling sense of self. And if your idling sense of self, you can look at it like a rhythm section in a band is going so fast or going too slow, well, then the rest of the band has to speed up or slow down. And I felt like the stress had let me going too fast and I was having a hard time managing how I was feeling. So when I started these practices, I started noticing relief, like really quickly, which started encouraging me to do more of it. And at one point in time, I think I was meditating 2 hours a day. I was getting up every morning, followed by 2 hours of yoga, and 2 hours of yoga. I mean, I wasn't working, so it was easy to do that, but it really became a really deep lifestyle that I was living for several years. And I found that it was unbelievably healing for my stress and my injuries. So I it was just like a natural path that I started to follow because I started almost following wellness and following flow, and it just naturally unfolded that way.
Nice. So you mostly did transcendental meditation, or did you also dive into the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza? Because when I think of meditation and healing, like his name pops up.
This was so long ago, like it was 2001 to 2004 when I first started diving in. So I didn't even know about Joe or anything. I just had this one community, and I didn't even understand that much about meditation at that time. I learned this TM practice and I found it made me feel so much more grounded that I was doing it regularly. And I think I was going through the other meditations, listening to guided meditations, doing yoga nidra, going to yoga classes and just following different teachers. But no, I didn't dive into Dr. Joe.
Yeah, okay.
Uh,
And then you kind of discovered interesting things when you could see the effects of psychedelics and how you could actually kind of get the brain into similar states by using neurofeedback.
yeah, when I really started working with the psychedelic informed neurofeedback and I started digging into the literature, I realized that it was this long lineage. And so in the beginning, there's this form of neurofeedback that's been around for quite some time called alpha theta. And there's different brain waves. I don't know how familiar folks are with brain waves, but the general is that the slower the brain wave, the deeper it's coming from your nervous system. And theta is kind of, there's delta, which is brainstem, and then theta is our emotional self. It's our relational self. It's our limbic system. And humans, like limbic resonance is a term we often use when we're with groups of people. Got a good vibe, you're feeling flow with others. It's more driven by the limbic system and the temporal lobes. And so then the alpha frequency is a step above that. And I had just said that alpha ties to the DMN and it ties to this rhythm section in the brain. So it's keeping the tempo. But theta is more of a trancy state, whereas alpha is more of a I'm watching the sunset and I'm relaxed state, but I'm present here. So what we do with alpha theta is that we drop alpha below theta, and you have this babbling brook sound for the alpha, and you have this wonderful ocean sound for the theta, and your client's laying there and this like brook is going, and then there's just whoosh, whoosh, as they start going into a trance state. And the trance state, in many ways, you can look at it like a hypnagogic state, the state that you go into right before sleep, or the hypnopompic when you are just waking up. And these states are really steeped in creativity and insight often. It's where we have these big moments where people are trying to seek hitting trance states when they're working on projects so that they can gain these deeper insights. Um, And a lot of this came from looking at people in hypnotic states and looking at individuals in shamanic states. So shamans totally go into theta states, especially some of the out of body experience stuff is actually dropping down into a delta state into your brainstem. So the research on this, for a long time, we saw that it really seemed to be helping with addictions and anyone that had trauma or a personality disorder. But then the lab that I came from, because we study heavy dissociation, that's when somebody's kind of lost their sense of self, or they've been so shocked with trauma that they're kind of like beside themselves, like either in front of themselves or outside of themselves, or if it goes long enough, they become fragmented and kind of forget themselves completely. And we actually, a postdoc discovered that it wasn't the crossover that everyone thought was so important. It was actually how many times alpha was suppressed. So then we started looking at this type of neurofeedback called alpha down. And in alpha down, we bring alpha down and then we see this rebound effect. So it's this interesting experience where it's like you plunger somebody's subconscious and then the content kind of comes back up and it pushes them back into themselves, because the dissociative state is an avoidant state. So we're like, don't be avoidant, come in to yourself now. Then we noticed that, like, wait a second, psychedelics are doing the exact same thing, but also so is transcendental meditation, where it's the suppression of alpha. And something else that does this is soma breathwork. So soma breathwork will see this too. I think a lot of the Wim Hof practices. So I started studying that, and really what it's taught me is that this alpha suppression, or this ability to modulate your alpha and regulate your DMN through whatever means you're doing this, helps with a state of equanimity in the nervous system. It helps your ego not be grasping for things or avoiding things. And so having a nice, rich alpha rhythm that's leading the charge and keeping the tempo for the rest of your nervous system is extremely important for you to be able to look at the world in an unbiased way through the quantumist lens, in a state where you're being more than you're doing. So doing doesn't lead, doing follows the being, and it arises when you want to, act. But we get so caught up in our egos and doing that now we're grasping and we're trying to control, or we're trying to avoid, and we don't like the way things are. So it's about coming back to that place. So that's kind of been the wheelhouse that I've hung out in for a long time.
So it seems like the key to this healing is really letting go, stop thinking too much, and
Yes.
surrender to your subconscious, which sounds very easy, but is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, like that's the biggest thing I started seeing, and I know we've done this. Marbot's done this experience a few times, where when we give a screen, it's in the flicker screen, and so every time you settle into being, the screen gets clear. In a second, you have a thought of like, oh, I wonder, and boom, screen is blurry. So it teaches you just how fine-tuned that filter is, and that's just one of the filters in the brain that we need to focus on. But all these practices that you guys are doing right now really do solicit that quieting of the DMN, and then there's a freshness or a presence that follows when we've dropped the DMN, and then we have that little bit of a rebound where there's a little more creativity, connectivity in the brain, and a sense of presence that's a little more at ease.
Yeah, actually, like 2 hours ago, we did a nice breathing session followed by an open heart meditation. And it's always like I introduce it this way, that it really, if you keep your eyes closed and if you come from the lying position, you sit on a cushion and you can kind of surrender into the bliss that you may have in these moments. And you kind of, sometimes you see colors, and it's just a very nice state to start surrendering into your meditation. And we always like to combine it this way. And also I like to combine it this way. I pretty much start all my meditations by at least one breathing cycle. It's just one quick way to get you into the state, and it just thoughts are just further away. You're less distracted, you're better focused, and I just love it. It's just, again, one of these biohacks, if you want to call it like that.
It's like CrossFit, and it's such an important one to do, because it's kind of like your core. If you're looking at the body, like our deeper states is like squat bay, and then the faster frequency stuff that we move up into cognitive work is like arm bay. But if you don't have a solid core, that causes issues with the rest. So always working in stuff that quiets the DMN is helpful for everything else that you do. And I think that's what helped me so much. I was so lucky to have stumbled upon that meditation first, because I think it really anchored the rest of my healing.
And you mentioned that with shamans and ancient traditional healing work that has also been discovered that they sort of more go into theta state and go to deeper state that enables them to heal themselves and maybe even others. Like, has it been discovered in doing actually brain scans while
Yeah.
healing sessions took place? Yeah.
Yeah. You'll even see there's been distance healing research where they put like the medicine man in one room and the person he's working with in another room. And very quickly, you'll start seeing their alpha frequencies start synchronizing. And they're going into a state together, even though they're not in the same room. This is actually pretty well documented. Anna Wise was another neurofeedback person who's really well known for putting on big displays and showing how this distance work can happen, or how if the group enters a state together, it can influence the person on the stage.
Wow. So it means the two people in different rooms, the brainwaves start to synchronize.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I have that in one of my slide deck open from my talk, that apparently it was hard to hear me. I'll show you a sec. Can I share my screen? Does it work?
Yes, I
Yeah,
just
it
enabled
does.
it.
Cool. Yeah, so this was the study. I have to move you guys off to the side. So the figure shows waveforms revealing 7.5 to 8 hertz frequency range in both the healer and subject at 3 parietal locations. Early in the healer sustained amplitude burst A, the phase of the subject does not match. However, as it continues, the subject does begin to synchronize. So we can start seeing that, like right in the middle, there's a synchronization of like the alpha bursts that wasn't there at the start. And it's, I don't know, this is like something, Jay Gunkelman is this researcher who's like the godfather of EEG. And so he published this in 2010. So if you want to look it up, it's called The Healing Connection, EEG Harmonics Entrainment and the Schumann Resonance. Some neurofeedback therapists won't train the Schumann resonance. They'll actually leave it out so that we can stay connected to the earth in general. But it was interesting how close it is to this, where they seem to synchronize. And this is just a recording. They weren't doing any training here.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, I once did a theta healing seminar, yeah, and I just went there and I didn't know what to expect. And actually, I can't believe that we can heal ourselves by meditation, by our mindset, by mental training that we do. But I always find it a bit hard to believe that I could heal others, or that it's possible to do distance healing, or that people from one place of the world can heal another person. And I was always skeptical about that. So it's pretty interesting to see that there's actually research showing that there is a connection, even though people are in separate rooms.
Yeah. There's been quite a bit of research on that. It's still, seen as fringe and questionable, but you just need one instance of it to show that it's possible and that it's worth looking into. I'm very skeptical as a scientist too, and I try not to get too snake oily about things. But I do know that, like, even being in a room with someone, that just my presence alone half the time and that limbic resonance is enough for someone to start healing. To have someone sit in front of you and accept all parts of you, and for you to receive that kind of like connection in an unbiased way, is super healing, because humans are always seeking to unfold. That's what we do, right? And that fragrance of who we are comes through being able to surrender into intimacy and enter into flow with other people without feeling like we need to guard or somehow be other than when we are. So we're not trying to do or to avoid, we're connected. And when I think of, there's a lot of new age, like higher states, get to a higher state, I find it interesting because this higher state, or the gamma state, is actually an emergent state of deep surrender. So it's not about achieving up and reaching and trying and doing. Like, it's not about doing more. It's actually about surrendering more, getting to know yourself more, allowing your authenticity more, deepening your relationship, deepening your acceptance of who are you in the symphony of music of all of us. We all have our note to play, and the more like self-aligned you are with your note and accepting of that, the more resonant and full the note will be. And then when there's a bunch of people who are like that, you can feel that, right? Like there's a sense of just ease amongst everyone because there's an acceptance and a resonance through that being together place.
Yeah, so like mostly when I think of these high gamma states, I think of monks that have been meditating for like 40 years.
Yeah.
So I guess that's like when the hype of these higher frequencies came into awareness of science. That when we discovered that they can kind of switch on these higher states
From
by
years of,
practicing.
yeah, but it's only because they're so self-aligned. Like gamma is a sign of knowing something effortlessly. So when you're showing gamma in the brain, it's because, excuse me, it's effortless for you to do whatever it is, but that's because you put the effort and time into learning it so that you get to a place of like effortless being, basically. But effortless being really means deep, deep surrender and acceptance and equanimity and curiosity and acceptance of like, an openness to the experience, which are those three traits of people who have mindful practices.
And does it actually really take 40 years to achieve these states?
So the story goes that there was a Swami who met a master student back in the day, and he could raise the temperature of his palm by 4 degrees, and it would turn kind of like a brighter red. And so the grad student was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And so the monk said it took him 13 years by watching to know how to do that. So the grad student went back and put a sensor on his hand, and he taught himself in 2 weeks. So technically, no, but the tendency towards spiritual bypassing can be high when doing this work. So technology, I think, can really help. I don't know how many people are familiar with like Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Vietnamese monk. Do you know him, Marbod?
No?
Okay, so he's a Vietnamese monk. He's got a center in France because he's basically been exiled because he's such a revolutionary and preaches peace and whatever else. So he opened this, it's called Plum Village in France. And he's kind of close to where the Dalai Lama is as far as like his followers and being revered as like a leader, a spiritual leader. And a few years ago, he had a stroke. And it was really disruptive to Plum Village because he had been always this leader of peace and kindness and gentleness. And the stroke left him very dysregulated. He was having nightmares. His attendants were really struggling to support him. And one of my mentors, Seaburn Fisher, who's well known in the neurofeedback community for working with trauma, had been following him, and he's a Buddhist. So she approached them and said, "I really think that I could potentially help you here." So they said, "Okay." And she's like, "It was really intense to be putting sensors on this sacred head, but let's do this." And another one of my supervisors also helped. And within a few days, they had calmed his symptoms. Now, we can't completely cure the brain of like stroke symptoms, but they helped him through that reflective technology. He was able to find self-regulation again, pathways that he has deeply rooted in his system, but that he had lost access to from the stroke. Then they also started training his attendants and teaching his attendants to bring their nervous systems back down after this trauma, because trauma can rewire us so fast. Actually, anything that captures your attention very, very precisely, like a mystical experience or a traumatic experience, can rewire the brain instantly. Because the more focused and attentive you are to something, the quicker the neural pathways reconnect.
And so then it's really hardwired into your brain. That's neuroplasticity really happening in an instant.
Yep, full captivation will do it. So they say it takes 465 repetitions to rebuild a neural network, unless you do it with play, and then it takes 10. So spontaneity and play, we're very attentive. So also be playful, have fun, be. The more you be, actually, the quicker you learn. We all try to do, but that actually takes longer. So because this was such an amazing process for him, they've actually found that all the monks who are interested now at Plum Village, they've started introducing neurofeedback as part of their training. And Thich Nhat Hanh himself said that he thinks that neurofeedback is a new Dharma door, and Dharma doors are pathways into self. And so for him to say that was a really beautiful and supportive reflection of that this technology is a meditation tool. And it's not a replacement for the practice, but it can help you get on the path and deepen your knowledge as you go.
That's very interesting, because I would think that monks would like push technology away and say the only real approach in doing this is sitting down for 40 years and there's no shortcut.
No, so the monks have adapted it, and his attendants now take it with them, and he still continues to regularly train to help him with his stroke symptoms.
Wow.
So you can do it quicker, but you know, you can access the state quicker, but you still have to work with yourself. Mm-hmm. It just clears that ability to do that work, but there's no replacement for that work. And the other piece is that, you know, if you look at the nervous system like a tree, we've got the roots and the branches. And when we're doing all this top-down peak performance, cognitive stuff, we're really only addressing the branches. And so we're all like, you know, there's a lot of emphasis. I get a lot of interest in flow states, and it's like sunshine on the leaves, and we're just gonna make them flourish. And I'm like, yeah, but are your roots nourished? Because if you're not getting good nutrients down there, then that doesn't matter what you do up here. And if anything, like we said with gamma, it's an emergent property to have a full tree, as opposed to like this top-down piece, because the nervous system stacks, and the deeper states have far more impact over the higher stuff than the other way around. Now, we want embodied cognition. It's important that it's all talking, but it's only through relationship and other, those deep loving kindness states, that we really nourish our roots. So you can only go so far in isolation and meditative practice, and before we need others and that deeper connection to deepen our roots.
I have seen programs that like promise, with the use of technology and neurofeedback, that you can achieve the states a lot quicker. So one of the programs states that you get the results of 40 years of meditation within, I guess, a week or two. Yeah, and the other one is a bit, more. I guess he's saying like in the benefit of 7 years of meditation you can achieve in a week. In this program, and it's actually like really expensive. I guess you pay like 15,000 euro, but
yeah.
They promise results, and they say you can achieve these states a lot quicker.
The BioCybernaut one? Yeah, so the BioCybernaut is all alpha synchrony. It is a very powerful program. I've heard very good things about it. It's very intensive, and it'll put you in that place where you have all that clarity, but then what? You know, like, that doesn't mean it stays. I could go hire a personal fitness coach to track all my food, make all my meals, take me through all of my workouts. Fantastic. And yeah, in a week, I'm going to be far more ripped than I would have been on my own. But I keep that up. Like, it's not now you've achieved. It doesn't work like that. So it's great. It can definitely speed it up and take you deeper into your practice, but you still need to have the wherewithal to continue the practices. And what are you doing with what you've achieved now that you got it?
Yeah, I wish I had that money to play around with. Then I would definitely go through the program, and I could then tell if it's worth it or not. But like at the moment, it's just a little bit too many promises. Like you have higher IQ of, I don't know, 10 points, and EQ and memory and all that stuff.
But you can do that with what you have right now in your system. You could be setting up alpha synchrony, and you could be doing it regularly. It's just that it's that deep, intensive program, and IQ points do go up with neurofeedback, because, you know, as resources that are being used for other things in the brain are allowed to allocate, like as the branches start to grow, all IQ is up here, because you're not oppressing, compressing, avoiding like different aspects of trauma and stress that have occurred in your life. Yeah, there's more resources. So it's really about allocating resources, and it doesn't need to be this idea that, you know, it needs to be that expensive or that magical, but it's just getting people to recognize their innate capacity for these things, and that it's through surrender. So he puts you in these dark rooms, you know, it's really intensive experiences, and it's just surrender. It's a week of deep surrender, and then, yeah, it can be more surrendered. But the world will quickly pull you back up if you're not mindful of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would be your recommendation, like with all your work with science and without, like the practices of really I would say, honest meditation and yoga and movement and breath work, what would you recommend to people to get more into the state of letting go, to surrender, enter deeper states, and then kind of start from that? Is there anything you can recommend with all your experience in that field?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you guys are already on a pretty solid path with what you're doing,
I
even
hope
this
so,
year.
yeah.
That it's really taking stock of your attentional investment each day. So your nervous system is wired to be highly attentive to threat and danger because that is adaptive. So for every stressful experience or thing that has captured your attention in a way that it's like, oh, that could be dangerous, or I got to worry about that, it takes 5 times the amount of investment in neutral states or pleasant states. And I try to avoid good and bad because, what's pleasant for me may not be pleasant for you. And you have to figure out that discernment too. If discomfort, which I know you guys like to push, is actually growth, or if that discomfort is you're crossing your boundaries. But in general, if we're looking at this like an investment strategy, investing in doing is a high risk investment. You are spending a lot of your attentional energy, you're spending a lot of your resources, and the return on that may not be that great. So we want to put about 30% of our investment of our attention there, and 70% of the rest of the time should be in nourishing and steeping in sensations that are neutral or moving into pleasant. And so with clients, I'll say, right now, my desk is neutral. When I was at my office, I was talking about that. But then it very quickly moved into like this gratitude where I was like, oh, I've had this desk my whole practice and I'm meeting all these people with it. And then I felt happy about my desk. But I think if you guys did the loving kindness practice, it's not the doing of the practice, it's the steeping and the sensation and the embodied experience that is coming from the practice that makes up that other 70%. So if you catch yourself in a place where your mind is leading and there's a lot of worry and there's a lot of racing, you're doing, and you're that investment strategy over time is going to take away from your being. And it's your relationship to these three that matters. So in any given moment, to just pause and say, how am I relating to these three? How much of my attention is being invested in what I'm worrying about? And can I just shift in this moment to balancing it a little bit more? And if you can do that with all the things you do, you're more likely to get more out of them in general.
So it's a bit like saying we shouldn't always get out of our comfort zone. Like it's kind of stated that we should all go out and be courageous and get out of the comfort zone. This is where the magic happens. So you would also say that, okay, do it a certain amount of time, but also spend time in your comfort zone. It's nourishing and it's good for you.
Definitely. I mean, you could equate that to chasing the dragon, right? You're always chasing the high. As long as you're seeking it, you're not finding it. It's actually not anywhere else other than right here, right now. And you don't need to add a lot to it to get to it, but challenging yourself to allow your ego to drop or different things like that, and then sitting with that experience and integrating that experience and being able to find a nourishment in it will take you further down into the ability to sit with the discomfort of sitting.
All right, great. I think we've covered a lot of topics, quite a rush through the different aspects here. I very much loved it. And I would like to open the space for everyone else who wants to ask a question so we can make sure that also the questions that come up are addressed. And I'm pretty sure Andres wants to find out about the hand warming technique by thought alone.
No, I mean, it was a great source of information. I'm amazed at how much I learned in the last 45 minutes and how many connections I was able to make when you were saying about releasing and let it go. That's for me, for example, Wim Hof. If during the breathing, if you have these states where you really like, then you have to let go. If you lose that control, is the only way. Or if you go into the ice and then you go with this sense of, I'm gonna crush the ice, then you're gonna jump out. But if you come in and you surrender, then you can stay, and then it opens up And since I was doing it, I also started feeling this sensation of just being rooted.
Yeah.
And that we know, because we've done it with Marvel, that when we hook ourselves up, Wim Hof breathing will get you crossovers between alpha and theta, and that you will go into those. And we say, when we tell it, we go deep, and it's just like exactly that. And now putting it together is like, whoa, yeah, that's exactly what I've been experiencing in the last 4 years that I've been doing Wim Hof. So it's thank you for that. That was a great insight for me.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's nice. A lot of people start being like, oh, I mean, we all share the same nervous system. And when you just start understanding what the nervous system does, you start seeing it in all these lineages and all these practices over the millennia that humans have engaged in. And the differences in those practices is just the lens of that person and how they narrate that story through their environment and their relationships. But in the end, we all have the same system.
Yeah. That was a really connector as well between this idea of science and going in, but at the same time looking deep into your nervous system to be able to free everything else. So that was also very interesting. Yeah. I can talk for the rest of the 10 minutes, so I'm gonna also open the room for everyone else.
Maybe I should make a cut here on this. I know him. One funny addition. Not the first one is not funny. It's what I said is this thing of when you nose breathe through movement, it's easier to get into a flowing state. I think this has some connection to this transcendent feeling. And the other thing is this is more funny. This is it was an article in the Guardian about 1 month ago. There was CIA files released about Russian experiments with ESP, or what's extrasensory perception. This is what I think it's about the same box like this distance healing. That the guy who invented the Buteyko method, which is the predecessor of the oxygen advantage, was part of this team. Actually, he was the most promising of the scientists. So with this breathing science, I think they took him to get into the science of extra sensory perception stuff, and he was the one who then installed big mirrors next to a person who should collect the radiation or whatever, or the mind waves to get infos into the guy's brain, or get infos of the brain out or something. So there's always a connection of breathing and extraterrestrial stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. Elmer Green was another early neurofeedback therapist, and he's got some pretty fun little chat like YouTubes that you can watch. And he even got into the place where his wife developed Alzheimer's, and he wrote an entire series of books called the Azawaki Book of the Dead, where he talked about how as the Alzheimer's set in, it actually opened her mind to greater states of consciousness and different dimensions. And he like documented the whole thing. And he was like, Alzheimer's isn't even what we think it is. And there's been a lot of interesting theorizing around this. And I have a lot of colleagues who study out of body experiences and like astral travel. And I just think that the human, when you get right into shamanic practice, I did a course with a doctor named Joe Trefour, and he wrote a book called The Fellowship of the River. And it's all about how ayahuasqueros learn their songs from the plants. And so they do this plant diet, and then the plants teach them songs. And then those songs and those diets teach them how to connect with the individuals. And he's like, and you just start having these visionary experiences where you'll see things coming out of people. And then in those states, we can work with those things. So he's actually doing research right now to look at the epigenetic change that follows psychedelic experiences. And if we can show that the trance state can affect epigenetic change, then we can start moving more of this into like the wellness community, even through insurance companies, because you're like, hey, we can actually document and track this stuff. And one of the things that we're doing with the Divergence platform is allowing people to co-regulate. So if we all had a headset, you know, hopefully within the year, we could all be going into states together. Because during my master's thesis in Marburg, you should probably be able to set it up on the Atlantis. I've not done it. I was using a different neurofeedback system before, but just through holding hands, you create a mutual ground, and then you put a sensor on each person's head. So one's the reference, one's the ground, and it's called a dual sum squash. So they're both contributing equally to the signal, but you both have to enter the state at a certain level together to achieve the reward. And it was profound. I could really feel the person with me, like when we were in or out, or so we're hoping to do like collective group flow experiences where we're, you know, everyone's getting feedback on entering the flow state together, which you do anyway, but then having that feedback helps you just identify it more easily in yourself so that you can experiencing it with others and steepen it when it's happening, right? Those subtle nuances of those states.
Let us know if you're looking for a test group. I think we can gather enough
Yeah, right? Soon. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. It sounds very exciting.
It sounds a bit like when conventional medicine was driven by the chemical industry. You know, the alternative medicine is now driven by breathing.
Yes. The soup and the sparks. I think the sparks are more subtle than the soup.
I would like to have one more question, actually. Maybe this is interesting for everybody. If someone has a problem like depression or something, how could he work with these methods you said, with biofeedback, with meditation styles, with microdosing? Is there a possibility if you're completely off in the back in the hillbillies or wherever, and there is no one around? Is it possible to do it via Zoom sessions? Or?
So that's the goal. That's why we're creating this platform, to increase access, so that I could be working with any one of you from a distance and have my hands on the sensors to be like, I can do this with Marbot already, but he has to buy the whole setup to do that. So we're trying to make it more accessible and that communities can work together, because I made that point that how important the relationship is. And we're all further apart than we've ever been. And that access to each other's nervous systems is the thing that we're missing the most. So these technologies are really helpful for those individuals. And it's deciphering, like, depression can come for many, many reasons. And there are epigenetic backgrounds for that, but sometimes those epigenetic backgrounds tie to transgenerational trauma too. So when I'm working with clients, I'm often trying to get a sense of their lineage and a sense of how did you get the temperament you got? Because women, like a female fetus, at 4 months has all her eggs she'll ever have her whole life. So I was inside my mother, inside my grandmother, when my mom was a 4-month-old fetus. And then I lived, inside of my mother through her whole pregnancy and then through her whole life. And then during gestation, babies are born prepared for the environment based on the nervous system that their mother had. So we carry this lineage for a long time. So helping clients recognize that there are shadows from the past that you carry that determine your temperament. Like, just like me, I need sunscreen. That's just a fact of my ginger reality because of the history of my ancestors. So getting that your nervous system will have a temperament, and maybe you're someone who has a slower nervous system, but then that environment that you were in was really stressful or oppressive, and you leaned into your temperament more and more. And so now you're stuck in depression. And it's just about valuing your temperament, but then finding flexibility in your nervous system again. The short person is never going to be the tall person, but the tall person needs to know how to duck, and the short person still needs to know how to have a ladder. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is that we start being hard on ourselves because our temperament seems to be leading us deeper into these difficult states, but that was adaptive. And so then it's like validating for people how adaptive the response of depression probably was for them. And if we can work through the shame cycle that's tied to a disconnect in our nervous system from our feeling selves, because it's often adaptive to shut down the feelings. So we just feel depressed because we're weighed down by this well of feelings we don't know what to do with, because for whatever reason we had to exile them. And that's exhausting to keep those walls all the time. So I think I'm hoping that relational technology moves us out of these like pathological mental health diagnoses that I think make people feel like they're broken. And so you're never broken, you adapted. And I want to know why. And then how can we open up your adaptation while still honoring your authentic temperament? Does that make sense?
Oh.
Yeah.
Very much. Great. Yeah.
Yeah, just as you said, that any like traumatic or even transcendental experience can change your neurobiology, and it can change quick, and you need to know how to get access to shift things back and to teach the brain how to reorganize itself in a more healthy way.
Yeah, it's all progressive overload, truly, and it has to be sustained. We have to be careful with a lot of folks really like dive into a lot of these practices and don't give themselves enough time to integrate the practice also. So you can overtrain your system, and then you'll feel like shit after. You'll be like, oh, like all my ghosts and everything are after me. Like we've all had that experience where you do the thing and then you're like, oh, it was a little bit too much. So getting a sense of your edges, which I'm hoping, a technology in the beginning starts teaching people, but as you do these practices, you do start recognizing your edges and limits a little bit more, which means you start leaning into them a little bit more. And then as you develop that deeper relationship, managing mood, understanding emotions becomes easier, and it lets you be more and have more freedom to enjoy life in a flow state, as opposed to constantly trying to fix it or control it or change it.
Great. I think we can squeeze in one more question. So if anyone still has something.
Marin Marina?
I'd like to talk about something if I may. So I noticed during your talk, thank you, by the way, it was so informative and really cool, and put together a lot of things. I noticed you just like use a lot of metaphors with music. So there was a rhythm section of the mind, and there was like being a tone in a symphony of the life. Yeah. And I just wondered if you might have been working with artists or with musicians even, or maybe with improvising artists also, because I think there's a huge connection between meditation and improvising. And as I'm a jazz musician, this is really interesting to me. And I just thought I would love to talk to you about that.
I put up a quote that I often share in my talks, which is, there will come a time when a disease condition will not be described as it is today by the physicians and psychologists, but it will be spoken of in musical terms as one would speak of a piano that was out of tune. So yes, 100%. We're rhythmic creatures, we're rhythmic beings. I think sound, your auditory system was one of the very first to develop in your nervous system. And so our auditory system is actually profoundly rooted into the brainstem, into the depth of our individual sense of self. So, and the idea of play and creativity, like all of that puts us into a state of being. So yes, I want to work more with that. I have a friend who's a musician who's making soundscapes for me right now for the neuromeditations. And so when people achieve a full state, like some of the neuromeditations will be monitoring several brainwaves and thresholding different areas. And so when you achieve the full state, you get the richness of the soundscape. And when you're not, it's like different parts drop out. And so I will teach people each of those rhythms individually, and then I'll give them the full soundscape. So you have like a sense of what it's showing you. And part of what the platform we're developing is about, and I'm not trying to make this into a marketing thing, it's just what I'm doing and ties to your question, is that it's a platform for, like, it's a playground for self-awareness. And we're just giving people the opportunity to finally start playing together with all the technology that already exists. And we hope, like, I'm just excited to see what are people going to do with it. So different apps will be developed that you'll be able to have access to. Like, we'll lay out the foundation, and then I think things I couldn't even fathom will start coming out of this as more creative minds start playing with it and giving people different options of how they want to interface with themselves.
Cool, Marina. Thanks a lot for the question. I've heard that Colin has another question. I guess we can squeeze it in before we hand over to Felipe. Thanks a lot, Marina.
There was almost too much. I think I just really wanted to express my appreciation. I mean, that I was not expecting that. So that was really, I don't know. I'm kind of flabbergasted right now, like pretty amazed with everything you covered. And I did write down a lot of questions, but I think I'm just gonna soak it up some and ponder it a little more. I guess I did have one question around just definitions. So if I do some research on my own, so what you're practicing is psychedelic neurofeedback, and by psychedelic you mean the actual states of consciousness rather than ethnogens in particular. Is that correct? Like if I was to begin kind of Googling that, is that a good search term?
Yeah, so deep states neurofeedback is more probably where you're going to find this. I'm definitely the person doing it. There's not nobody else.
Right.
Has really.
If you Google it, you'll find Heather.
Yeah, I've got lots of talks on YouTube. If you have.
Oh, you do.
Questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been my thing.
Yeah, this was like. Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of information. I could sit here for a couple hours and listen to you. That was so good. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciated being here with you guys. I really enjoy sharing. This is like clearly more than a job for me. It's become like an outright obsession. And the more I get to share with people, the more I learn. And a lot of what I've learned has come from my clients, you know, like genuinely working with people and working with these things. Thank you, Kitty. going from there. So I love interacting, and I appreciate you guys inviting me here today. And I really wish you guys a happy continued journey with everything that you guys are doing.
You know, thank you very much, and we're gonna invite you again.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come.
I guess so too. Yeah, we'll have to make a second part, and then everyone comes prepared with 2 pages of questions. But I can totally agree with Colin. Like I enjoyed it a lot, and like with all the talks we already had, Heather, I always ended up writing 2 pages of stuff I had to do research on. So yeah, the journey really continues. Yeah,
it's for me, I think because I gave myself during my master's thesis when I was learning this neurofeedback, probably 3 sessions a week, and the girls in my program were like, how the hell are you so productive and so happy all the time? Like, I'm like, I don't know, I just feel like I'm in flow. And then the message I've gotten from ceremony and working with plant medicines is just facilitate the flow. And so the answer is always, when I'm not sure, share. It seems to be like the direction. And the more I do that, the more I find myself in situations like this. And I think my clients find a similar thing. So the more you can allow yourself to be and really trust as things are unfolding, and then make those efforts when they're needed, but don't be so fixated on the outcome as much as like, you know, what's actually happening right now, even if it's hard.
Yeah, so Heather, thanks a lot. It was very nice to have you here in the interview, and I guess we have to invite you again.
Sounds good. Hopefully in person one day.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So next time, next month, March 13, we'll have Norman Schuck here in the interview, another meditation instructor. And yes, I guess we'll dive deep into meditation, healing, and Dr. Joe Dispenza's work and
he's a Dispenza guy.
Yeah, his work in the research team. So it kind of heads the same direction here. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Heather. That was awesome. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.